She leaned back on the couch, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "Be grateful I'm still here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, the kind only someone who thinks they own your patience can muster. Her words were meant to provoke, to remind me of my place, and to make me feel small. But instead of reacting, I smiled. A slow, quiet smile that masked the storm inside me. My name is Luke, and for the past 7 years, I had lived in a marriage that slowly became a game of power and control. Sarah, my wife, had always been strong-willed, ambitious, and confident. But over time, her confidence turned sharp, cutting at every opportunity she had to assert dominance. What she didn't realize was that I had changed too. I had grown quiet, observant, patient, a predator in my own right, waiting for the right moment to reclaim my life. It wasn't that I had stopped loving her. It was that I had stopped recognizing the woman I had married. The laughter, the affection, the late-night whispers of dreams, they had been replaced with sarcasm, eye rolls, and constant subtle reminders that my worth was measured by how much I tolerated her. And that day, sitting across from her, I realized I didn't have to tolerate it anymore. "I'm not grateful," I said calmly, letting each word land like a weight. She blinked, her smirk faltering for the first time. I could see the confusion flicker in her eyes. "In fact," I continued, voice steady, "I've found someone else." Her jaw tightened, and for a second, the room felt suspended in disbelief. Sarah had always assumed she could push, mock, manipulate, and I would stay. But the calm in my voice, the certainty in my words shattered that illusion. She opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, to argue, to remind me that she was still in charge. But I didn't give her the chance. I stood, feeling the energy shift, the balance of power tilt back in my favor. "Pack your things," I said softly, almost casually. "It's time to start living our lives separately." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the wine glass on the table, her eyes darting between me and the door as if searching for a loophole, a way to reverse the inevitability I had set in motion. She had forgotten one fundamental rule of life. Some boundaries once crossed cannot be uncrossed. And in that moment I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about leaving a marriage. It was about reclaiming myself, my dignity, my control, and the right to choose happiness on my own terms. The next morning, the air in the house was heavy with tension. Sarah moved around like a shadow, trying to act normal. But every glance she threw my way was laced with uncertainty. She had always relied on control, her laughter, her sarcasm, her ability to twist words into traps. But now that control was gone. I poured myself coffee at the kitchen counter, keeping my movements calm and deliberate. I didn't need to speak. She watched me, fidgeting with a sleeve, searching for a reaction, any hint of doubt or weakness. But there was none. I had rehearsed this in my mind countless times, and now I executed it with quiet precision. "You're really serious?" she asked finally, voice shaky, trying to mask panic with a hint of defiance. "Yes," I said simply. "I've thought about this for a long time, and I've realized that being with someone who respects me and values me is more important than staying in a marriage that has lost all sense of equality and trust." Her lips pressed into a thin line. You can't do this to us," she whispered. "After everything, after the years we've shared." I nodded slowly. "I know, and I appreciate those years. But appreciation doesn't mean staying where I'm not respected. I'm done pretending that your mockery and manipulation are acceptable." I grabbed a suitcase from the closet, her suitcase, and began laying out her clothes. Every movement was slow, deliberate. Each fold was a reminder that this wasn't a threat. It was inevitability. She approached, desperate to stop me, but I held up a hand. "No arguments, no explanations," I said. "You've made your choices. I'm making mine. It's time to separate our lives." Her voice broke then, just slightly. "Luke, please. I can change. I can fix this." I looked at her, calm and steady. "It's not about fixing you. It's about reclaiming myself." By noon, the suitcase was packed, zipped, and ready by the door. She lingered near the threshold, hesitation evident, but I said nothing. The cab I had arranged for her waited outside, a silent witness to the consequence of her actions. She glanced at me one last time, and in her eyes I saw the full weight of her realization. I had finally chosen myself, and there was no turning back. The house was quiet afterward. No shouting, no drama, no begging. Just a lingering sense of justice, calm, and clarity. For the first time in years, I felt free from mockery, free from manipulation, free to live on my own terms. And that freedom was worth every moment of patience I had exercised, every subtle observation, every quiet calculation that led to this point. The cab arrived just as the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Sarah stood at the door, suitcase in hand, a mixture of anger, fear, and regret written across her face. She opened her mouth, likely to argue or plead, but I shook my head. There was nothing left to say. "Luke, you can't just," she started, voice breaking. I held up my hand, cutting her off gently but firmly. "I've already said everything that needed to be said. This is not about anger or revenge. It's about clarity, boundaries, and respect. You've had your chance to honor those things, and you chose differently." Her eyes filled with tears as she realized the finality of the moment. The power she thought she wielded was gone. I hadn't shouted, hadn't begged, hadn't argued. I simply acted. Actions, after all, are louder than words, and she would remember mine. She turned toward the cab, hesitant, dragging her suitcase slowly as if every step was a punishment she had brought upon herself. I watched in silence, feeling a strange mix of relief and quiet triumph. Relief because I had reclaimed control over my life. Triumph because I had done it with patience, precision, and dignity. When the cab pulled away, the house felt empty but clean. The tension that had built over years of mockery, manipulation, and disregard had vanished with her. I walked from room to room, breathing in the calm and allowing myself to finally feel the freedom I had earned. That night I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, the cool evening air brushing against my face. I reflected on what had happened, on the mockery she used to belittle me, the manipulation she thought I hadn't noticed, and the boundaries she had crossed thinking I would stay silent. I realized something crucial. Strength is not shown through confrontation alone. Sometimes it's shown through control, patience, and letting the natural consequences of someone's choices unfold. And in that realization I felt peace. My heart was no longer heavy with anger or resentment. Instead, it was light with clarity, knowing I had acted for myself, for my dignity, and for the life I deserved. As I looked out into the quiet night, I understood this. A marriage is a partnership, not a battlefield to be conquered with mockery or dominance. Respect is non-negotiable. And when someone shows you they cannot honor that respect, the only choice left is to step away. Firmly, calmly, and without regret. For the first time in years, I smiled freely. I had taken back my life, my happiness, and my control. And I knew that the future, whatever it held, was mine to shape.